Cameras on. Hi, good afternoon, Ms. Saro. Thank you for for this interview with the National Critics' Choice and the Policymaker online news. Um, Malaysia is now facing some kind of a food crisis that is not really talked about, and yet we hear that Malaysia is importing rice as well. Could you give us some insight what's happening with the inflation of prices that's going on in Malaysia?
Yeah, the food crisis, because the emphasis for Malaysia in the past has been in industrialization. There's been very little focus on developing the agricultural sector until very recent. So it has a negative impact on this because now a lot of our food is imported, and the food bills, I don't have the statistics right now, but it's in the billions, and even at almost 10 years ago, when we started to alert the policymakers in Malaysia that we have to focus on agriculture, that we have to be at least some level of self-sufficiency should be there for Malaysia in terms of food. It was not taken very seriously. The women in Malaysia have to do the cooking because they are involved and they're responsible to put food on the table, and so the whole family actually has to respond to this, and sometimes they have to take extra jobs, so sometimes they have two jobs, both members of the family, women and men, to cook at the urban level, in the urban centers. But at the level of the villages, and also in terms of the question of the agricultural workers, the indigenous people, they are the most affected. So if you look at for example, malnutrition of children below the age of 5, if you look at UNICEF figures, that like 20% of children below the age of 5 are malnourished in Malaysia, which is, you can't believe, because it's supposed to be reaching developed status. We were industrializing very rapidly, and most of these children are from the Orang Asli, or the indigenous people's communities, and some level also with the plantation workers. So the way that women are kind of coping, this is basically coping mechanism. They have started to look at some level of growing their own food in whatever pieces of land that they can have access to. And for the indigenous people who live in the near the forest, that has been a key element. Some of the problem also has been that we don't usually see poor Orang Aslis begging in the streets of Kuching. It's happening. For the first time that there is that level of poverty, and for the women, it also means that, like for the plantation workers, we know that they work in the plantation, and if they are near factories, they would also have a second job in the factory in the afternoon shift. So they would work morning from 7 to 3, and then from 3 to 11 in the factory, come home and do their washing and all their household work. So it's a very major burden for women, and at the same time the awareness and support for women also is not there at the policy, whether it's at the policy level or at the local level. They are still seen as helping the husbands, whether it's in the farming or even in terms of plantation workers, or even in the homes, for example. So they're seen still in that kind of status, although women have been asserting their rights for the last many decades now, from the time of independence. One thing that is quite clear is that the government announced that there is some level that if they continue the subsidies, to the food and the petrol, that they would go bankrupt in 2013 or some 5 years, I think they said, and that this was like a year ago. And so they are trying to remove subsidies, which is costing the government quite a lot of money, without understanding that the subsidies are very important because they're basic. It's for rice, it's for sugar, it's for flour, and basic food items that especially the poor require in terms of subsidies. And so I think it's a bad policy, and so there's also been a lot of unhappiness about the levels of corruption in the government in terms of governance, because there's a lot of money being spent on military wear, equipment that's used. It's going the billions, and yet they can't subsidize food for the poor, or provide good services for the poor.
How important is for the government and the business to recognize property rights? There's an issue about property rights, especially in states like Sarawak, that we have heard, where land has been converted into a commercial entity for palm oil and other resources. What sort of impact does that actually impose for the people in Malaysia?
Well, in Sarawak, there's the native customary rights, and these are recognized by law, and it basically provides certain amount of control of the land and the forest in the hands of the indigenous people. Now, the law has been slowly eroded from the time of the British, and so the criteria for identifying which is native customary rights land and forest, that criteria is being reduced, and so the indigenous people have been fighting this for a long time, and right now there are like 200 over cases of land conflicts in the Sarawak court, brought by the indigenous people against the state government as well as the corporations. Some of these lands have been leased to the corporations for 99 years, and a lot. Previously, the indigenous people, the Ibans and the Orang Asli, they have been very trusting of the government, and so sometimes they sign on without understanding what they're signing on in terms of the document. But now they're more aware, and so a lot of the cases are because of that awareness that is taking place. So what should be done? I think those lands that there is conflict, the companies and the government should be talking to the indigenous people. There's no conflict resolution. There's only scare tactics that are being used. Even, for example, when one of the cases, Long Teran case, was won by the indigenous people, there was no enforcement of that decision by the court. And so, through a process of the company is now being forced to have some level of conflict resolution and dialogues with the indigenous people, but again they are splitting the community in, and it makes it very difficult. So the idea is, when you do conflict resolution, is actually talk to the whole community as a whole, and let them decide who will represent them to the companies, not for the company to decide that this is whom we will talk to. So that, and then in that way you don't create conflict. Now, what can the government do? I think they should stop expanding into oil palm plantations. I think one of the things that we are losing is our forest land. The kind of diversity, both in terms of wildlife and plant species, is disappearing. So we have to pay attention to conservation and stop the logging, the kind of oil palm expansion, and review our food production policies, because we cannot depend on imports. We cannot depend on food being imported to feed our population. If not, we'll be in a very difficult situation in the future.
Well, thank you, Ms. Saro, for this time with us at the National Critics' Choice and the Policymaker Online News, and we hope to see more developments and perhaps an improvement in Malaysia.
Thank you.